The chief clerk, please call the roll.
Senate roll call, Day 7, January 22nd, 2025. Anderson? Here. Barlow? Present. Boner? Here. Brennan? Here. Case? Present. Cooper? Here. Crago? Here. Crum? Here. Dockstetter? Here. Driscoll? Here. French? Here. Guru? Hicks? Here. Hutchings? Here. Ide? Here. Jones? Here. Kolb? Landon? Here. Larson? Here. McEwen? Here. Nethercott? Here. Olson? Here. Pappas? Here. Pearson? Here. Rothfuss? Here. Salazar? Here. Schuler? Here. Scott? Here. Smith? Here. Guru? Excused. Kolb? Excused. And President Biden?
Here.
President, 28 present, 2 excused.
Thanks, Ellen. Prayer by Reverend Richard Gilbert.
You've heard about show and tell. Well, this is going to be show and prayer. When I was in high school, we also had a helmet, one grade above the leather helmets. It was plastic, webbing on the inside, nothing in the front. Wow. Nothing in the front to protect teeth, nose, or eyes, but the helmet. That's from Central High School, and if you look at it closely, you can see it has been nicked. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, you have created in marvelous and mysterious ways. You have placed within us vital organs necessary for life and needing protection. Be for us a helmet upon our heads, so in turn we may protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in others. It is not in selfishness that we ask for your personal helmet of protection, but that we may serve as a helmet protecting the well-being of your whole creation. Today we hold in prayer all those whose boots are on the ground, protecting the welfare of all life in danger zones, be they police in domestic areas, firefighters in firestorms, military in war zones, and many others whose lives are on the line, protecting the safety, education, employment, health, and even the retirement of others. St. Paul called it a helmet of salvation. We may call it a helmet of service, or both. Eternal God, of presence and power, we ask for your protection from harm, all people, and we sometimes call them public servants, who are themselves protecting the vital parts of all persons and property. Should we believe we are a helmet protecting the vital parts of people and property, may we wear it proudly and proficiently. So we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend. Senator Crum, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reading correction and approval of journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee reports?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of January 21, 2025 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Crum, Chairman.
Good job, Senator Crum. You're doing a fine job. Are there any objections to the Journal Committee report? Being none, the report has been adopted. Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, January 21, 2025. Message number 112. Mr. President, the House adopted the Committee of the Whole report failing House Bill number 50, Disclosure of Sensitive Information Law Enforcement. Ayes 21, noes 36, excused 5. The bill has been indefinitely postponed. Sincerely, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you, Randy. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Keep these committees rolling here. Senate File 100. First reading of the bill.
Senate File 100, Child Witnesses Courtroom Procedures, sponsored by Senator Schuler.
Senate File 100 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 101, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 101, Post-Conviction DNA Testing Procedure Amendments, sponsored by Senator Landon.
Senate File 101 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 117.
Senate File 117, Shared Parenting, sponsored by Senator Pearson.
Senate File 117 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 122, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 122, Voyeurism Sex Offender Registration Amendment, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
Senate File 122 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 85, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 85, Constitutional Enforcement of Localities, sponsored by Senator Ide.
Senate File 85 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 126, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 126, Establishment of a K-8 Public Lab School, sponsored by Senator Rothfuss.
Senate File 126 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 118.
Senate File 118, Landowner Hunting Tags Amendments, sponsored by Senator Pearson.
Senate File 118 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. Senate File 47, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 47, Board of Trustees Systems of Public Recreation Amendment, sponsored by Senator Landon.
Senate File 47 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 5, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 5, School District Vehicles Flashing Lights Authorized, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
Senate File 5 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. Senate File 83, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 83, Large Energy Project Funding Legislative Approval, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
Senate File 83 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. Senate File 97, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 97, Trust Code Revisions, sponsored by Senator Case.
Senate File 97 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. Senate File 134, first reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 134, Industrial Siting Wildlife Mitigation, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senate File 134 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. Let's see here. Bills on second reading. Are there any amendments, Ellen? Yes, okay. Okay. Senate File 19, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 19, Impact Assistance Payments, Maximum Percentages and Review.
Senate File 19 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, and is so ordered. Senate File 26, second reading in the Senate file.
Senate File 26, Protection of Military Equipment.
Senate File 26 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Senate File 27.
Senate File 27, Wyoming National Guard Member Referral Amendments.
Senate File 27 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 36, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 36, Music Therapy, Use of Title.
Senate File 36 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 48, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 48, Business Property Exemption.
Senate File 48 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Senate File 49, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 49, Tangible Personal Property Index and Depreciation.
There is an amendment sponsored by Senator Pappas. Will the reading clerk read in the amendment?
Senate File 49, Second Reading Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 11, delete.
Thank you, Randy. Senator Pappas.
Yes, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File, what are we on? 49, and ask for your favorable approval. Yesterday, we defeated an amendment that removed the floor, the zero floor, and we put it back to 20, but there were other parts of the amendment that actually needed to stay in there. And if you look at the amendment, the mobile homes also was in that amendment. That portion of the amendment should continue on. And also the definition of, there was discussion in committee whether it should be purchase price, whether it be acquisition, and the words that you see there were the words that the department thought would be the logical wording. So it's just a cleanup. We need to continue allowing mobile homes to be because they're separate. And then we also would like to change that the wording on the purchase price acquisition to the words that you see.
Any discussion on the amendment? Senator Scott.
Mr. President, the amendment excludes any property valued under 3913-102M and then proceeds to the mobile homes. My question is, what is the property that is valued under 3913-102M?
Thank you, Senator. Any more questions before we go back to the bringer of the amendment? Seeing none, Senator Pappas?
It was, we were told that in committee. At this juncture, I can't recall what it was, but it was a logical reason to, but I'll look it up and I'll bring it back to you at another time. Thank you. I just don't remember.
Thank you. Okay. You've heard Senator Pappas' motion to adopt second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 49. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? No. Sounds like the ayes have it. The division being called. All those in favor, please stand. 18. All those opposed? Less than 18. Okay. The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Case.
Mr. President, just in regards to the previous question from the tall senator, if we could get it today, it's better than not. That 102M, that is state assessed property. So that is like pipelines, railroads, those kind of things that are state assessed, not assessed by our local assessors. And I think utilities fall on that too. There's a whole list. It's gross product mines and mining claim, property of pipelines, electric utilities, railroad companies, rail car companies, telecom. Anyway, you get the gist. There's a couple more things in there. I think there's something with respect to airlines. And so that's it, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Case. Okay, Senate File 49 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Oops, sorry about that. Senate File 56, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 56, providing false information to registered agents.
Senate File 56 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Senate File 57, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 57, 911 service reporting.
Senate File 57 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 59, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 59, registered agents release of records.
Senate File 59 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 90, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 90, youth organizations in schools.
Senate File 90 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objections, it is so ordered. Senate File 99, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 99, game and fish property tax exemption.
Senate File 99 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading and final passage. Do we have a consent list? Yes, we do. Madam Majority Floor Leader, do we have a consent list?
Yes, Mr. President. I
Okay.
move the consent list, which consists as follows. And I believe there's a correction for the staff to the consent list that was provided, so listen to me carefully, make sure I have the correct consent list. Senate File 33, non-citizen driver's license and ID card revisions. Senate File 38, performance compensation investment performance amendment. Senate File 53, trademarks and trade names administrative cancellation. Senate File 72, Summer Vacation Preservation Act.
Thank you, Madam Majority Floor Leader. Would anybody like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Okay. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 33, non-citizen driver's license and ID card revisions. Senate File 38, performance compensation investment performance amendment. Senate File 53, trademarks and trade names administrative cancellation. And Senate File 72, Summer Vacation Preservation Act. Chief Clerk will call the roll.
On the consent list, Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Cooper? Crago? Crum? Dockstetter? Driscoll? French? Guru? Hicks? Hutchings? Ide? Jones? Kolb? Excused. Landon? Larson? McEwen? Nethercott?
Aye.
Olson? Pappas? Pearson? Rothfuss? Salazar? Schuler? Scott? Smith? Steinmetz? President Beitman.
Aye.
On the consent list, 30 aye, 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the, oops. Oh, she needs to ask for changes. I jumped the gun.
Senate File 33, are there any changes? Rothfuss, aye to no. Case? Aye to no. Guru, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 33, 27 aye, 3 no, 1 excused. Senate File 38, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 38, 30 aye, 1 excused. Senate File 53, are there any changes? Aye? Aye to no. French? Aye to no. Rothfuss, aye to no. McEwen? Aye to no. Larson? Larson? Aye to no. Salazar, aye to no. Nethercott, aye to no. Guru, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Pearson, aye to no. Jones, aye to no.
Beitman, no.
Beitman, aye to no. Hutchings, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 53, 16 aye, 14 no, 1 excused. And lastly, Senate File 72, are there any changes? Case, aye to no. Cooper, aye to no. Scott, no. Driscoll, no. Jones, no. Larson, aye to no. Nethercott, aye to no. And aye to no. Schuler, aye to no. Pappas, no. McEwen, no. Barlow, no. Pearson, no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 72, 17 aye, 13 no, 1 excused.
Okay. Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 33, non-citizen driver's license and ID card revisions. Senate File 38, performance compensation, investment performance amendments. Senate File 53, trademarks and trade names, administrative cancellation. and Senate File 72, Summer Vacation Preservation Act, have passed the Senate. Bills on third reading. So takes care of the consent list. Senate File 7, Protection Order Amendments. Let's see here. Third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 7, Protection Order Amendments, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to stalking, sexual assault, and domestic violence protection orders.
So if we have an amendment. Senator Hicks. Oh, can we have the amendment read in, please? And then we'll go to Senator Hicks.
Senate File 7, third reading amendment number 1, page 5, line 3, in.
Thank you. Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 7 and ask for your favorable consideration. This is just mostly just it adds an omission to the standing committee amendment. That omission is, and this deals specifically with mailing of protection orders. What the committee's directive is to say it's going to be sold regular mail and certified mail. It's kind of a belt and suspenders thing to make sure that some people won't accept registered mail, but they still get the order, extension of the order. This is just to include, it wasn't supposed to be or, it was supposed to be an and. That's all it does is just corrects that omission. Mr. President, ask for your favorable consideration. Stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 7, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That amendment has been adopted. Any further discussion on the bill? Further discussion? The Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 7. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Craigo? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Garou? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? Aye. Kolb excused. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 730 aye, 1 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 7 has passed the Senate. Senate File 44, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 44, Fairness in Sports, Intercollegiate Athletics, sponsored by Senator Schuler, an act relating to education.
There is an amendment. Will the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 44, third reading amendment number 1, delete.
Senator Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 44. Ask for the body's favorable consideration. So as this bill originally came out of committee, there was a provision providing for a civil cause of action, private cause of action for enforcement purposes. That particular provision did not have any sort of limit on it. And then there was a second reading amendment, I believe, or committee of the whole amendment, brought to change that language. And it only affected the enforcement provisions of this particular bill. And under that amendment, the liability was limited to $50,000, and it also referenced the Governmental Claims Act. And the discussion of that was had and brought by the bringer of the amendment was a good one because it sort of got me to thinking about what are we doing here? We're creating a private cause of action and we're exempting governmental entities from the Governmental Claims Act by not explicitly exempting them from the Governmental Claims Act. And so I got to thinking, why are we doing that? What's the policy decision? And how would the courts actually look at that when we start exempting entities from the Governmental Claims Act without explicitly? So if you open up your green books, the Governmental Claims Act says all governmental entities are exempt. They're immune from lawsuit. They have governmental immunity, except where we carve it out. And there's many exceptions and exemptions listed into the Governmental Claims Act. And what the Committee of the Whole Amendment does is create this gray area. We're saying you can sue them, but we're not. You can sue for damages, but we're not explicitly exempting you from the Governmental Claims Act. And then we're limiting the amount, which is different than the amount that's actually in the act. And so my concern is with this bill primarily, but secondarily, as we start seeing other issues where we want to sue the government and different entities within the government, is this a precedent we want to set? And I would argue it's not. And so what my amendment does is create a different enforcement mechanism. It essentially says, hey, you can sue, you can bring injunctive relief, and you can request injunctive relief. And the hammer or the enforcement mechanism within my amendment is the attorney's fees, which typically we don't allow, right? And I would argue that this is a stronger, even though we don't allow damages, it's a stronger enforcement tool for the bill, for the act. And that's because $50,000 does not go very far when you start suing people and you start battling the government. $50,000 attorney's fees is not going to get you very far. And under the Committee of the Whole Amendment, you're not entitled to any more than that, not even for your fees. And so you would have to use that amount, the $50,000, to pay your attorney's fees and any damages. And so mine just shifts the enforcement mechanism. I think it's more fair, and I think it's actually a stronger way to do it. It also eliminates the gray area of creating an exemption, but not creating an exemption. And so with that, I'd answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Senator. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against this amendment. Here's why. This amendment wants you to authorize an unlimited amount of taxpayers' dollars to be paid not to the girls or not to the victims of this violation of law, but to the lawyers. And the only people who will profit are the lawyers. It's not uncommon in these cases for those lawyers to come from the state south of us, typically referred to as 17th Street lawyers down in the big capital city to the south of us, that love to sue the state of Wyoming. Why? Because most Wyoming lawyers are a little hesitant about suing their local governing boards, local higher institutions of higher education. So they get the big power brokers who charge $700 an hour plus. This amendment authorizes unlimited taxpayers' dollars to go to those 17th Street lawyers, and all the victims of the violation of this law get is an order that says, please stop. Not good policy for the state of Wyoming. The amendment that this body previously passed on Committee of the Whole did one thing. It did not create an exception to the Governmental Claims Act. The bill does that already, and so does this amendment. What we are doing is authorizing suit against a government entity. The Governmental Claims Act prevents the authorization of suits except for in 6 circumstances, and now this. This bill, however, these amendments limit the amount of damages authorized. The previous amendment required a claimant to follow the procedural process, did not make it an exception to the Claims Act, just requires giving the government notice of a potential cause of action. That's the notice requirement in the Governmental Claims Act. Why? Gives the government an opportunity to prepare for a defense, to potentially settle it outside of litigation, get their documents in order, understand the concern. Why do we have that in law? Because it's the taxpayers' money. And it requires responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility of those involved. And so the amendment on committee of the whole required anyone who wants to sue a government entity or higher education institution in this state is required to give notice first. And then they can sue, and they have the right of a preliminary injunction available to them already. That is not eliminated in the previous amendment that you passed. So preliminary injunction is an available remedy they have available to them, in addition to direct damages that may be caused to the player or players, which may truly exist. And I don't know all the circumstances that that can occur, but let's say, for example, a player who may be on scholarship and may be recruited by another institution has to forfeit a game or do some other activity as a result of a violation of the statute, and they may be financially damaged as a result of that. I can't imagine all the scenarios that that can occur, but that's one that I can see. That player then has a right to financial relief for those damages caused. That's fair. That's how our system works. Under this amendment, the only person getting money, an unlimited amount of money, are the lawyers. I urge your strong no vote against this amendment.
Any other discussion before we go back to the bringer of the amendment for his second time? Anybody else for their first time on the amendment? Any non-lawyers want to get in this fight? Are you all eating your popcorn and watching this thing? Okay, lawyers. Mr. Craigo, back to you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. So while it may be true, under the proposed amendment here today, the athletes, the student athletes, are not going to be entitled to any damages. I would submit to you that under the current amendment that is on the bill, the student athlete isn't going to get any damages either. All of that money will go towards paying their lawyer because it will cost that plus some. And what I would tell you is they probably won't even be able to get a lawyer because a lawyer's not going to take a case for less than that. They won't be able to litigate this particular case. And so we will be left with student athletes who actually don't have a remedy under this law. If we're trying to create a law that's enforceable and provide a remedy, that's it. Allowing for the attorney's fees. I would also submit that this is actually a fair amendment, because if a frivolous claim is brought, the university or the colleges actually can receive attorney's fees back for defending the lawsuit. That's not in the amendment that's currently on the bill. So this is actually there's a lot of equity built into this. And so at the end of the day, we have to decide, do we want to pass a law that has some teeth and that can actually be enforced by the student athletes, or do we want to make sure it doesn't get enforced at all? And so, Mr. Chairman, if you want to enforce the law, pass the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Craigo. All right, we're on Senator Craigo's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 44. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Oof. Let's do a standing division so we get this right. All those in favor, please stand. Okay, I'm a no. 14 aye. Okay, that amendment has failed. Oh, you still got to stand and stretch, but I am 100% sure that the math adds up here. $16 no. Okay. So third reading amendment number 1 has failed. We're back on the bill. Any further discussion on the bill? I see Senator Anderson standing up. Oh, he's just still stretching, but no fear, Senator
Not to pick
Driscoll.
on you, but you should announce your vote on those, either stand
You
with
bet.
it or announce. Thank
It
you.
was 14 aye, 16 no, 1 excused.
How did the chair vote?
The chair voted no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Gotcha. Okay. Okay, discussion on the bill before we vote. Seeing none, Senate File 44, will the chief clerk please call the roll on it?
Third reading roll call, Senate File 44, Anderson. Aye. Barlow. Aye. Boner. Aye. Brennan. Aye. Case. No. Cooper. Aye. Crago. Aye. Crum. Aye. Dockstetter. Aye. Driscoll. Aye. French. Aye. Carew. No. Hicks. Aye. Hutchings. Aye. Ide. Aye. Jones. Aye. Kolb excuse. Landon. Aye. Larson. Aye. McEwen. Aye. Nethercott. Aye. Olson. Aye. Pappas. Aye. Pearson. Aye. Rothfuss. No. Salazar. Aye. Schuler. Aye. Scott. Aye. Smith. Aye. Steinmetz. Aye. President Beitman.
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 44, 27 aye, 3 no, 1 excused.
Senate File 44, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 44 has passed the Senate. Senate File 70, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 70, Investment Modernization State Non-Permanent Funds, sponsored by the Capital Finance Committee, an act relating to public funds.
Any discussion on Senate File 70? There are no amendments. And it requires a 2/3 vote because it involves money. Chief Clerk, Senate File 70 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The Chief Clerk will call the roll. Investment direction, sorry. Investment direction is what your point of order was, I'm sure?
It is the one word, Mr. President. Not just about whether it's
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, roll call.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 70. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? No. Carew? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Kolb excused. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? No. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? No. Steinmetz? No. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Larson, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 70, 23 aye, 7 no, 1 excused.
Okay. Having received Senate File 70, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected, of 2/3, supermajority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 70 has passed the Senate. Okay. Consideration of bills on general file, Madam Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Motion carried. Senator Pappas, come on down. Seat's warm.
I think there's consequences for those decisions. No, I do.
Committee of the Whole will now come to order. The first bill for your
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, Mike,
Oh,
thanks. Turn it off. Turn it off.
oh, you're.
Mr. Chairman, can you please turn?
There we go. Okay, so the first bill for our consideration is Senate File 81. Will the reading clerk please read the bill?
Senate File 81, tax exemption, property owned by the state, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee, an act relating to taxation and revenue. It was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Crago, French, Ide, McEwen, and Pearson. Senator French, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Driscoll, Grew, Larson, Salazar, and Smith. Senator Salazar, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Who is someone going to move this bill? Agriculture. Okay. Senator French.
I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 81 do pass, and for an explanation, I call on Senator Crago.
Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senate File 81, there are two of the committees took up this topic, which is the exemption of state-owned property. In October of this year, our Supreme Court handed down a ruling regarding the exemption of state-owned property. And obviously in the Agricultural Committee, one of our biggest issues was, and concerns for that matter, was all of our state land leases. And so what the Supreme Court opinion said, and rightly so, and if you turn into, if you look in your Constitution, Article 15, Section 12, it talks about exemptions. And the provision, and I'll just read it, says the property of the United States, the state, counties, cities, towns, school districts, and municipal corporations, when used primarily for governmental purpose and public libraries, lots within the buildings thereon, and used exclusively for religious worship, churches, church parsonages, church schools, and public cemeteries shall be exempt from taxation, and such other property as the legislature may by general law provide. And so the two provisions that are important for purposes of today and the discussion of this bill is the clause that says when used primarily for a governmental purpose, and then the end that other exemptions as the legislature may by general law provide. And so Agriculture Committee took this up, as did your Revenue Committee. And so there are two bills actually on the general file to deal with this. I think, actually, I'm not sure the revenue bill has made it back to general file yet, but we took a very simplistic view in the Agriculture Committee, and what this bill does is says all property owned by the state of Wyoming would be exempt. So that provision on page 2 is the exemption. And then what we did in the agricultural committee was have this particular law sunset or repeal at the end of 2026. So that would give us 2 years to go in and address this Supreme Court opinion. And it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. There is an amendment, if that could get read in, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Senate File 81, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, after line 3, insert.
And so the amendment, and I would move the amendment at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 8. And so what this amendment does, Mr. Chairman, is just puts the standard effective language in there. The language that is currently in the bill is not the right language. It also provides that this would apply to this tax year, to 2025 tax year. And so I would stand for any questions on the amendment first, and if there are none, I'd call for the question.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly how to approach this because these amendments are kind of tangled up together and they have implications. So the bill exempts all government property, Mr. Chairman, all of it. And this bill makes that effective immediately. There seems to be a subsequent amendment that's going to narrow that down. I guess I would speak, we just can't do the all government property. So it's a bad idea to do all government property immediately, believe me. We really need to think about this more, so I would oppose this amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Crago's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 81 signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no?
No.
Let's have a standing vote. All those who say aye, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. All those opposed, please stand. Seven. Do we have any excused? Do we have any excused? It doesn't matter, right? Yes, that amendment, the vote was 18-7, so the motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 81 has passed. Now we're back on the bill. Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if this is appropriate time. I also have a Committee of the Whole amendment.
That was the Committee of the Whole amendment?
Sorry. No. That was a Standing Committee amendment, Mr. Chairman.
I don't have a Standing Committee amendment.
The effective date, Mr. Chairman, was the Standing Committee amendment. Takes the bill, makes it effective immediately. We did pass it, so that stands. There still is a potential Committee of the Whole amendment. I hope we could maybe discuss the bill in concept first.
Okay, I found it. Thank you. Okay, so let's read in this Committee of the Whole amendment.
Senate File 81, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 2, after.
Okay, Senator Crago.
Mr. Chairman, I am happy to discuss the bill with the good senator from the back corner of the room. If that is the chairman's prerogative, I have no problem doing that as well. Either way, otherwise I can go ahead and move the Committee of the Whole amendment at this time.
Okay. Do you want to discuss the amendment? Present the amendment? Who is presenting this amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I am. I'll move Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1 to Senate File 8. And just a little bit of discussion, and this will actually get us into the bill probably as well, so the good senator from the back corner we can talk about it. In committee, just a few short days ago, as we're reading through the bill, a lot of the testimony had to do with the fact that we already have exemptions built into our statutes. If you pull up 3911-105, there are certain things that we exempt, and then there are certain things that we say are not exempt, certain governmental-owned properties. And a blanket exemption is going to cause, whether it's done by the Agricultural Committee or the Revenue Committee, is going to cause all sorts of issues. And so what I was really, and I told the committee when we left, and I told other members of the public that were there that I would try to work on some language to clean that up, so that we're not, for example, we have another bill that we're talking about property owned by our agency that deals with our wildlife, right? This would, as currently drafted, this bill would cause issues with that. It's going to leave our county assessors with all sorts of uncertainty. And really, in the agricultural committee, what we really were worried about is what this amendment addresses, which is our lands that are leased for agricultural purposes, all of our state trust lands and those lands that are leased to ag lessees. And so this amendment simply narrows the bill down to that. It still has the 2-year sunset. We can still talk about that. It still gives us time. It gives our good Revenue Committee the time to address it, which I think they're the proper committee to address the holistic issue, not the Agricultural Committee. I think we were really focused on this. And so when I left, I told our committee members that I would work on this. I think this is the easiest and simplest solution to deal with that problem. And again, it does not change the sunset. We would still have to readdress this in 2 years as part of the holistic review. The bill that will be coming to the floor, or likely to come to the floor later, has a task force set up and can really address more of the bigger issues. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on this particular amendment.
Any questions on the amendment? Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I do wish we would have discussed the concept of the bill first, because the bill is about government property in general. This amendment limits it, and if it limits the application to grazing leases. And I think that's an improvement over the bill, I'll give you that. But the whole concept here is whether the government should, when they do non-governmental things in competition with the private sector, get a tax advantage for that. That's the basic question here. If we have, and I'll use grazing leases so that we focus on the amendment, sir, but if you have a person that leases their agricultural land out to another person for grazing, that is taxable property. And the taxation is based on the productivity of the agricultural property. And I think it no doubt would be a fairly modest amount in the world of taxation, but the anybody leasing private ground would have to probably support the taxes on that private ground. If across the road there is a government-owned ground, the grazing fees most likely, if there are no taxes, they could potentially be less than on the private ground. So you're driving a wedge between what private companies have to pay, private individuals have to pay, and what the government enjoys. The Supreme Court did a very good thing when they finally made a ruling in this area and said that government, you do get a tax exemption as long as you perform a governmental function. So if you lease ground for a filling station and you're the government, a big plaza that's a fuel stop, that's going to be taxed. And that's probably a really good decision when you look at the world of public versus private. And what this bill has said is we're going to narrow it down to grazing leases only. And that, I guess I can support the amendment. It makes a bad bill better, smaller impact, but it doesn't deal with the basic issue of government competing with the private sector.
Okay, any more discussion on the amendment? On the amendment? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of Senator Grego's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 81, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 81 has been adopted. So we're back on the bill. Senator McEwen.
Might I suggest we just kill this bill and let it run through revenue, because we're dealing with both of them, and we will not have a problem with the conflicts of everything. And the same amendments that you want to bring to this bill can be brought to the revenue bill, and we'll make sure everything's in concert. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I rise really to express confusion about this bill. It seems to me now we're talking about the section 1636, the other grazing leases across the state. And I didn't follow the argument at all about competition with private land. I think the real issue there is that we got those lands saying they were to be entirely for the benefit of the schools and the various institutions such as the university for which we got a land grant. And if we go around and turn around and tax those lands, are we not violating that particular provision? And Mr. Chairman, so I do express a degree of confusion as to what all the implications of this bill are. Is that, am I seeing things that are not there, or do we have some special reasons not to tax this kind of land, because we really ought to be putting all the money the government gets from that land to the beneficiaries for which we received that land?
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I'll try. This is why we should have talked about the bill first. The bill, as it started out, exempted all property owned by the state of Wyoming, 100%, no matter what the purpose was. No matter what the purpose was. It caught up the grazing issue, but it also caught up any of the other leases that the state would have, or any of the other uses of property that, so they would all be exempt no matter what it is. So we probably appropriately narrowed it to be just to grazing leases with that last amendment, so that grazing, property used for grazing owned by the state of Wyoming is exempt. And so with respect to the issue of the common school land funds and the fact that most of our leases owned by the state are on school trust land that would benefit trusts, there indeed might be a connection. I will give you that. But I also think that if you compare them to private entities, which now, private entities who lease their ground, those private entities have to pay taxes. They compete with the public entities, the people that use the public land, the government-owned land, and according to this bill, they won't. So we kind of have to go for this one because it has leases, instead of thinking about it from the top down and really considering whether land that is not being used for a government purpose and owned by the state of Wyoming should have to pay taxes. And that was the ruling of our Wyoming Supreme Court in a recent case.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to understand better, and maybe the sponsors of the bills could walk through what will happen if we don't pass this bill. I don't really understand that. That would be great.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. just to clear up some issues with the whole bill and where we're at. So this, Mr. Chairman, came to us at our last Ag Committee meeting because of the court decision. And what happens if we don't pass something, whether it's the revenue bill or this bill, is that a lot of people who have not been paying taxes on these will get a large tax bill in their mailbox this year from our assessors who were at the meeting as well. And so this changes the whole paradigm in people's business models of how they've been doing business for hundreds of years in the state of Wyoming with regard to their state leases, to other leases and things that they've been doing all across the state. So this is initially the narrow scope we brought with the initial bill. We're taking it back to the initial bill. Then when we were in the committee, it was broadened to try to get it all property that had enjoyed that tax exemption for all of these years, so that we can give our assessors and all of the people who are, doing business this way a moment, a pause. Then we can convene some kind of task force or special committee that can deal with this issue, because it is complex. But if we don't do something this session, we'll be handing out enormous tax bills to people who have not been paying them in the past. And I hazard a guess that our phones will all be ringing off the hooks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, good senator from Goshen County. That sort of sets the stage or why this came to us. And just a point of information too, if there is, what drove this was, a parking lot, gas station, truck stop, and this lawsuit is what triggered it. But just remember that the structure is still, or any improvements are still taxed. We're talking about the land in particular here, but the structures on a commercial operation are still taxed. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I need some clarification. So I'm going to lay out what I understand that the implications of the court case are to these. I'm going to stick with the bill as it stands, agricultural lands. So by constitution, agricultural lands or leases can be no more than 10 years. So these are leases that need renewed every 10 years, or if there's some other change, at a shorter time. Part of the challenge with those leases is they don't contemplate property taxes being due by the lessee. And so if the property taxes aren't due to the lessee, it's actually not the lessee that's going to get the bill for the taxes. It's the state of Wyoming. It's Office of State Lands Investment, Board of Land Commissioners, whatever the proper entity is. If it's another agency, it'll be that agency that'll receive that, not the lessee. We'll go back to the private enterprise. I, as a lessee, don't pay the taxes unless that's part of my lease agreement. It goes to the actual owner of the property. That's who gets that tax notice. So I think the issue is here, if we don't actually do something with this, it's the state of Wyoming that's on the hook. And maybe that's the reference to, because of the lease terms, more than likely. And maybe that's the reference the good chairman of revenue says, we're bringing something that addresses that part of it on behalf of the state of Wyoming. I don't know. I'd love to hear that clarification. But leases on any other lease in the state of Wyoming can have a maximum term, I believe right now is 75 years. Much different. And those may actually talk about the taxes available or taxes due by the lessor. But my understanding is with agriculture, they're 10-year leases at the max, and it's the state of Wyoming that's on the hook for this right now as assessors put out their assessments, and then finally the treasurer says, here's what's due. It'll come to that office that takes care of state lands or any other lands that are held by a state agency. I'd go a step further, and I agree with my colleague from the Corporations Committee, the chairman of the Corporations Committee. Yeah, there are implications to this beyond. Think about all the commercial other projects that are on these lands. There's going to be lots of folks, including our assessor's office, trying to get up to speed because of this. I go a step further, and this is not in the court case, you can go a step further and say, what about all the subdivisions of the state? County lands, all, et cetera, and it's my understanding that counties, cities, et cetera, are handling this differently. So there's going to be a readjustment here and through this. So maybe it's just to clarify, these lands now are subject to, if they're not being used for a governmental purpose, primarily for governmental purpose, it's whoever the landowner is, in this case, the state of Wyoming or those agencies within it, that would get the tax bill unless there's some provision within the lease itself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'll do a little further explanation. I'm the SLIB liaison, so I've sat through the SLIB meetings as well. The ag people did a great job of explaining it. You know, the court forced us into actually doing some type of action. There is doing nothing is really a bad action. The assessors don't know how to handle it. The state doesn't know how to handle it. First blush of the SLIB board was to pass the tax on to the ag lessees because that's really the only complete file they have. The really interesting part is it'll add about $2 an AUM was the rough figure they had to a lease, which is about a 30% increase per year to it. On top of that, these state leasees, if they have a oil tank battery or a compressor station on them, those are attached to the ground. Legally, these are now going to be and they were going to send the bill to the ag person. It's the only way they knew how to do it. You can imagine your shock on a state lease that's $800 a year and you get a tax bill for $18,900. That's what you potentially are looking at. You're going to have an instant messed up deal. This bill is an attempt to slow it down, give the assessors a chance to come in and figure out how to do this, the state how to do it, and also for us how to respond to the Supreme Court. Because what the court said was not hardcore. It said pending further action from the legislature. So this bill buys us time. There'll be further bills to come deal with it because we still want the income that comes from those oil lands, possibly even from grazing leases in some fashion. But we really need time to figure this out. Doing nothing is a horrible option. So I encourage us to pass this bill knowing that it's probably not the end of it's not the train station. This is not the end of it, but it buys us a couple years to do the right thing instead of doing something knee-jerk that's detrimental to a huge class of people, not just grazing leases, oil and gas and state income. You got to keep in mind, this money benefits our children. And basically, you potentially could cost our school funds a huge amount of money if you don't pass something that leaves a piece in. The amendment did a great job of making it where the other part of it still is going to stay the same as it is, isn't going to change much, but we're not going to do a knee-jerk to our ag community, and particularly taxing them for something that they don't even have any part of it. They're a leasee and they're going to get a bill for somebody else's operation. So I encourage you to pass this. Might have to hold your nose a little for some of you. We'll bring a better bill in the future.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more kind of a point of inquiry, but I've heard the debate, and the court put us in a bind, and you know how I can be sensitive to those issues, and that the assessors don't know how to handle it. It was the assessors who initiated the action, the assessment, and the litigation. So they brought the issue to the state, and the state and the assessors litigated. The litigation had been ongoing for at least a year or so. Everyone had a lot of notice as to what the Constitution said, what those concerns may be, and what an opinion could result in. And so I want to spread out some of the knee-jerk reaction and talk about maybe responsibility from the assessors, the state, and the legislature, that this should not have been as big of a surprise as we feel like it is in creating that urgency, and perhaps take a little more personal responsibility all around that this actually is no surprise. And the assessors should have been on the ready, recognizing that at least one county assessor pushed the issue forward by assessing the assessment, which is also not a new concept in the state of Wyoming. I believe Albany County has done very similar actions in the past. with different rulings. So I just want to provide that and add that history to the conversation that our surprise shouldn't be.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I like this bill. I liked it in its initial form. I don't like that we amended it to ag leases only. I'd like to see it cover everyone. Since we did that, I've had 2 people ask that they be part of the exemption also. So if it passes, I'm sure you'll see plenty of other people asking for exemption. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that we really need to ascertain is because this now becomes a tax liability, Office of State Lands and Investments is mandated under the Constitution to manage these for the highest rate of return for the beneficiaries. If it's school trust lands, then it's the K through 12 program. So to do that, they're going to have to pass these costs on, not only to the ag producers, but all those out there. But keep in mind the receipts, and this is where I think the Supreme Court may have got it wrong, is they looked at the activity, but they didn't follow the money. So when we lease those state leases, whether it's for a treater unit or oil or gas or whatever part, if not all of those receipts, depending on the activity, go back to the school foundation program. So it actually generates revenue for the trustees. Now, it may not be for the actual activity, a governmental purpose, let's say a truck stop, but let's say that truck stop generates a significant amount of revenue for that lease. Part or all, depending on the nature of that lease, goes back to those trustees into the school foundation program. So my concern is if we don't pause and we understand the whole ramifications of increasing the cost to do business on state lands, does that then have an offset that we reduce the amount of commercial activity on those lands, whether it be grazing lease or not? Because it could have an adverse effect, actually decreasing revenue for the purpose of what those lands are, is to maximize revenue for the trustees. And so for that reason, I think we need to just kind of, let's freeze this thing, look at it. I really want to try to understand the implications of the overall revenue coming back to the school foundation program and the cost of doing business. And it may not change that much. It just increases the cost of doing business. But keep in mind, those revenues off of those leases, all or part, depending on the nature of those leases, come back to the school foundation program. So it's a revenue generator. And so, again, I think that the court may have got fixated on the practice not being a governmental practice, but the revenue certainly was. And so I want to understand that better and the implications going forward on the school foundation program, not just the tax implications.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I think we got to be careful. This isn't just about school trust lands owned by the state of Wyoming. This is all government property that's leased for something that is not for a government purpose. It's Article 15, Section 12 of the Wyoming Constitution. You should take a look at it. It says exemption from taxation. The property of the United States, the state, counties, cities, towns, school districts, and municipal corporations when used primarily for a governmental purpose, and public libraries, lots with buildings thereon used exclusively for religious worship, church parsonages, church schools, and public cemeteries shall be exempt from taxation, and such other property as the legislature may, by general law, provide. So it's at that top level. It includes government property owned by all these entities. If they're not for a governmental purpose, the court has ruled they're taxable. It was a ruling about a particular county. It has very broad implications, but it is not just school trust land and you don't follow the money to where it goes. It's at your municipality. You may lease land at the airport for hangar space. There might be a restaurant at your airport in your municipality. Restaurants aren't government purposes unless we want to say that they are, but we'd have a hard time. So it's a very, very big deal. And I would venture that the grazing leases that we're talking about aren't all on school trust land either. You know, some of the grazing leases in Wyoming are on institutional land. It's not trust land. So it's bigger than that. We need a lot more thinking about this concept in a bigger way. But when it comes down to the practical implications, it is the state that will be liable for the taxes, or any other governmental entity, all right? Well, this case, with the amendment, it's state grazing leases, okay? They're gonna be exempt. And so, but if it wasn't for that, for this bill now amended, then those grazing lessees could potentially face an increase in their lease costs. But the bill goes to the governmental entity. And I'd like to get more information. We heard that it was $2 a year per AUM. Is that a lot of money, or is that a little money? That's the potential that we're looking at here. And we should think about that as well. This whole thing needs a lot more work.
Senator Rothfuss? No. Oh, okay. Senator Kriegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do not disagree that this needs work. That's why we're asking for 2 years. We're not asking for a permanent change in the law. We're asking for a 2-year time period to figure this out, Mr. Chairman. Just a little bit of, I guess, a little more background. There is a proposed rule that will go into effect if we don't pass some sort of exemption, and those costs of whatever taxes we assess, our local assessors place on the state, will go back to your local producers, your local folks back home. The complicated part about that is, and the good senator from Campbell County talked a little bit about it, actually some of the newer leases provide that the taxes can be passed on. A lot of the older leases do not. And so I think you're going to get into some arguments, or at least they're silent on the issue, I should say that. They don't prohibit it. They're just silent on the issue, Mr. Chairman. But some of our newer grazing leases actually have a provision addressing this issue within the leases. And so I think we're going to end up with some inequities there if we don't give ourselves a couple years to figure this out. This also will be a burden on our assessors. For years, they've not taxed the agricultural parcels within their counties. If we're unable to pass an exemption, at least for the agricultural parcels, they will have to do a lot of extra work to make sure this gets into the CAMA system. Can they do it? Absolutely. We're just going to be putting a lot on them. The other thing, and I think the good senator from Fremont County talked about it, a lot of your assessors are already assessing government-owned property, state-owned property, county-owned property. If it's not being used for a governmental purpose, a lot of your county assessors are assessing that tax. I mean, there was one there, not all of them were, but a lot of them already are, and so there won't be a whole lot of change. The one that's really big is this one, and that's the agricultural parcels. Those were not being assessed in any county. And so this is an attempt to buy us some time on that. I know there's another bill coming that will address the bigger issue. This is just trying to narrow it just for 2 years. I agree this needs a bigger, broader look, and we need something we haven't looked at for a very long time, and hopefully we can do that. I just ask for your support for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further, Senator Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know when the Supreme Court ruling came through, I immediately was panicked because ag is suffering, not only in this state, but across the country. We can't afford any more fees, any more regulations. If you saw the regulations that are going on, at least in the sheep industry, from our federal government, we can't afford any more. And you can see what our sheep industry has suffered over, probably the last 25 years. So we have to do something to protect ag. And as far as it not being a governmental this is not benefiting government or whatever. My dad tells the story about when the draft came through. And he applied to go into the Army way back then. And the government came to him and said, please stay at home and produce food and fiber for the country, meaning our military, for uniforms and things like that. So we've got to protect ag at the very least, because we're being hit. And I want to remind you too that ag producers cannot, I guess, pass down these taxes to other people. Or to the consumer. We are beholden to whatever the market is at the time that we sell. So we're not able to do that. So just keep those things in mind, please. Thank you.
Senator Smith.
Mr. Chair, this is really a question to the young lady from near the Green River, because she would be an expert in this. I grew up in Rock Springs, Wyoming. As you know, it's kind of looks like the moon over there. It's kind of hard to run cattle there, but people do. And I'm curious if this tax was passed along, there'd be a big tax for somebody who's not running very many cattle, I think, on these public lands. So could you, is that a fair statement? Mr. Chair?
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think for clarity, the state pays the tax. The state pays the tax. Thank you.
I was under the impression it'd be passed on to the person that has the grazing lease.
Senator Pearson.
Yes, I understand that the state currently pays the tax. I understand that. The point being that if the state decides to pass these taxes on to our ag producers, that's just going to be another tax that we're having to pay, we have got to support our food supply in this country. And whether you want to call it government or not government, we have to support that, because our ag producers are being taxed and fined and regulated out of the business. So at the very least, we have to decide, are we going to support our food supply? Are we going to try to maintain the food supply in this state? Does that answer your question or no? Thank you.
Any further discussion? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this issue is complex, and I don't pretend to understand it all. It was a query or a notice by one of the members saying, hey, I've got a couple of folks that now want them added to their taxes or their use, non-governmental use of state lands added to this. And I already mentioned that we're going to have to deal with this with other types of lands, municipal, county, et cetera, depending on which county you're in and what that county assessor is actually doing at this time. But I would call folks' attention to in many of the mines and mining, which includes hard and liquid, et cetera. The same article, Taxation and Revenue of our Constitution 15, Section 3, says if you actually have mineral production, the land is exempt from that taxation. So for folks out there who may be in the mining industry, which is all products that basically come from the ground, that's actually constitutional. They are already exempt. The land is already exempt, and I get a notice every year about where are the oil wells on your ranch that would be exempt from taxation, and if I turn it in, I can be exempted for 40 acres per oil well, and if I don't turn it in, then I pay the taxes on that land. So I just want to be clear that the Constitution has exceptions built into it as well that are not their lands or activities, and the lands associated with that activities that are already exempt constitutionally. Now, what we have to decide is statutorily, how do we want to extend that for particular uses or more broadly? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Guru, please. Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, we need a way forward, and I'd suggest let's pass this bill out of committee of the whole. And I'd ask my colleagues to look at a bill that we considered but didn't approve for introduction in 2020. It was sponsored by the Joint Interim Revenue Committee, and it was called Governmental Property. It was Senate File 59 in 2020. And it attempted to more accurately illustrate what was government property and what wasn't government property. It's not perfect. It doesn't address grazing, and that it seems to be of some concern here, $2 per animal unit per year. But this is another approach to handling this issue that's more direct. But in order not to lose this vehicle that we have in front of us, we have time to introduce other vehicles. I'd suggest let's pass it forward as amended and take a look at these other bills and discuss the other approach. It's a serious issue, and it deserves a more coordinated look at it than really kind of piecemeal. So that would be my suggestion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Senator McEwen.
I just want to reiterate something. Senate File 68 deals with all state-owned lands. We can fix that in this bill. If we pass this bill along, we're going to have to carve that out of another bill. And if we have to, that's fine. We can do that. I just think we have a better vehicle, and I think we all need to work together with the better vehicle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator French's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with favorable recommendation on Senate File 81, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
Senate File 81 has passed the Senate. Oh, passed the committee of the whole. Excuse me. Thank you. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I promise I'll work harder on my nonverbal communication skills next time. I didn't want to derail that argument because it was an important argument, and I wanted everybody to keep their train of thought. But you know, no matter what happens with that bill, it's probably going to wind up in court. And just a minute ago, all the folks who are around in both galleries were the hardworking clerks of court that are going to be handling all the paperwork that's going to come down based on what we do here. So even though they've left, I promised that I would ask you to give them a rousing Senate welcome so they can watch it on tape tonight and while they're sitting back at the hotel and know how much we love them. The clerks of court of the state of Wyoming. Woo! I'm a big court.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Okay, the next file for our consideration is Senate File 28. Will the reading clerk please read the bill?
Senate File 28, ROTC Endowment Program, an act relating to education, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Brennan, Cooper, and Pappas. Excused, Senator Kolb. Senator Pappas, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Cooper?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move when the committee of the whole rises to report, it does so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 28. And here to present the bill is our very own Platte River Cowboy. Here he is.
Senator Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a product of the Transportation Committee's interim work dealing with military retention and recruitment. And part of that, especially for our Army National Guard, includes our ROTC program at the University of Wyoming. So Military science, aerospace studies is a basic part of the land grant mission of our university. What this bill does is it establishes an endowment fund that would help fund the military science program at the university. No additional appropriations, allows for private donations especially. And it's just one way that we can help bolster an important part of our university. I know we've had some very in-depth and sometimes difficult discussions about the direction of our university. I believe that the interim committee found an element of the university that is not only within the scope of its land grant mission, but clearly has benefits to our state and nation. So going through the bill, what it does is it sets two funds, as we're familiar with around here, an endowment fund and an income fund. Going on to page 2, we limit that you can't expend an amount not to exceed 100% of the prior year's fiscal earnings, so there's some constraint on the income there. And a few additional features. Accrued interest and earnings shall be credited to the income account, and any unexpended unobligated funds shall be credited to the endowment itself. So getting on the bottom of page 3, line 17, there's some important provisions dealing with how the Board of Trustees will interact, or maybe more than the point, not interact with these funds. The income account, or the income from the endowment will go directly to the RTC program without delay. Going on to page 4, they'll not account for any of these funds in their budget requests. And most importantly, this is something we deal with, unfortunately, with the university all the time. They can't basically use these as replacement funds. They can't take the funds that they were spending currently on the program and just say, oh, now we got this new income fund, we're going to displace these funds, and in fact, the net effect would be nothing to the program for which it's intended. So very clear guidance there on page 4, line 10. Then requiring a report to both the Transportation and Appropriations Committee. Moving on to page 5, we have some guidance as to how these funds can be spent. It'll be spent on academic programs, tactical laboratory programs, field training, instructional resources and equipment, recruitment and retention of students, as well as faculty and financial aid for students. So moving on to the bottom of page 6, requires another report, an annual report on the fund, not just to the legislature, but also to the governor as well. And you'll see the details of the report going on as finishing out section 1 on page 7. So have conforming amendments. Once again, important highlight on page 8 that we can either appropriate funds as the legislature to this endowment, or they can seek private funds. And so that's basically the bill, Mr. Chairman, July 1st effective date. Right now, they're spending about $294,000. And the block grant currently goes to support the RTC program. That's mostly for personnel. There's one, basically an administrative assistant for each program, as well as some scholarship money is given to cadets, which is important because there's the federal scholarships that the Department of Defense provides come and go depending on their needs for end strength. That provides stability to this program for our university. And also, I just have to point out that all these, the faculty are actually they're active duty military personnel. No state funds are expended, though we do get the tuition payments for everybody who signs up for these classes. So pretty good deal for the state of Wyoming, a clear part of the land grant mission of the university. And I hope that we can, as we continue to discuss the direction of our university, that this can be a useful mechanism for highlighting and reinforcing parts of the land grant mission which have been important to this institution. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions on Senate File 28? Questions? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a good idea. I just had a couple questions about the structure. The first is it was unclear to me whether this is one of the permanent inviolate style endowments or whether this is one of our structured endowments where we can actually take the corpus of it. So a question there. Second question is, this appears to me to be a state-controlled fund, even though it's through the universities. If that's the case, does that mean it is then invested by our state treasurer, or is it invested by university decisions? That's the second question. And the third is, I don't see it in here, but any initial seed money available for this, like from the private sector, or are we looking to the state for the seed money? How will this become initiated so that it actually has the finances? Those are my three, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Boner.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to answer the first question, yes, this is involved, and so that's Article 15, Section 20. And I believe there's a reference on page 8, line 5. So that's that reference there that yeah, it will be involved, and it will be invested by the treasurer, to be clear. This will be a state fund. No plans for any seed money or anything like that just yet. I imagine that could be a discussion we have in the budget process, but that's not the objective here today. Certainly, private funds, I think, would be the first thought. We can analyze how it goes, but like I said, hopefully this can be, engender a broader discussion about how we support the land-grant university. But I think I'm gaining a bit of reputation in this building for looking for matching funds, private funds, things like that. So that's I think that'd be the main focus immediately.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess I'm kind of confused and wonder what this does to improve what we're already doing. Maybe if you could explain that, I am confused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we heard testimony that, if we were to increase funding, one way or the other, this would be used for example, there's about a need for about $65,000 worth of physical training, fitness equipment. Right now, like I said, the scholarship programs fluctuate. They're looking at roughly $123,000 loss from that federal scholarship program, and they're even talking about recruiting and retention. There's the idea of perhaps they can have a digital media manager and have that be an additional position that's supported by the state funds in addition to the two positions that I'm aware of. So those are some of the examples that would enhance recruiting, retention, and the quality of the program overall.
Okay. Further discussion? Senator Rothfuss.
And just to follow on with that, we have a higher education endowment at this point already, which is one of our inviolate funds, and it generates millions of dollars every year because there's been investment. You have the opportunity for private sector investment as well. So as that fund grows, that's more resources then that can be used for higher education. That includes our colleges and the university around the state. So as I understand this, it's basically mirroring that same type of format where it's managed by the state. You look for opportunities to fill it up, and as it generates revenue, then you have a revenue stream to support a community, the ROTC community in particular, and that takes the load off of the taxpayers to come up with these new programs and puts it on, hopefully, private sector interests, support communities, matching funds, whatever we can do. So, there's a tremendous upside to this, and I do think this is a community on campus that is primed for exactly this type of fundraising. Honestly, I think we could raise some funds to our ROTC community, and they could benefit from it in perpetuity. Take the pressure off of our general fund and allow for some permanent funds available to support the programs.
Any further discussion? Question being called for. All those in favor of Senator Cooper's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to the report, that it do so with favorable recommendation of Senate File 28, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. Senate File 28 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for your consideration is Senate File 2. Will the reading clerk please read the bill?
Senate File 2, Hunting Licenses Weighted Bonus System, an act relating to game and fish sponsored by the Travel Committee, was referred To committee number 6, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Hicks, Landon, and Schuler. No, Senator Boner. Excuse, Senator Jones. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Landon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report and do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 2, hunting licenses weighted bonus point system. Mr. Chairman, we do have a standing committee amendment. I'd ask that that be read in at this time.
Senate File 2, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 6, line 6, delete.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the amendment, and for a description of the bill, I'd ask that you call on the senator from Southern Carbon County.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File Number 2 and ask for your favorable consideration. Members, I would like to just dispose of the Standing Committee Amendment. This is more of a technical correction that our department found in the bill. And what this does is just strikes new language, which dealt with basically female species, cow-calf and ewe lamb for moose and bighorn sheep. The way this was drafted, that put a prohibition once in a lifetime. That was not the intent. And so this just says once every 5 years, you can reapply for those female species. So, Mr. Chairman, it's a technical correction found by the department. I would ask for your aye vote on this, and then I'll get into the bill.
Any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Hicks's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 2, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. The amendment, the Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File Number 2 has been adopted. Please continue.
Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman, and members of the body, this is a product that came out of the Wildlife Task Force a couple of years ago. It's been working through the system. That task force met 16 times over 18 months. Most of those were multiple day meetings. This probably consumed more time of that Wildlife Task Force than any other issue that we grappled with, maybe with the exception of landowner tags for hunting big game species. But clearly, substantial public input. It was an open public process. We held those meetings in the middle of the state, and this is the byproduct of all of those deliberations that came out of there. And members of the body, what this deals with is the point systems for allocating to increase your chances of either drawing a bighorn sheep or a moose permit. Whether you're a resident or non-resident, it applies to both. I will tell you, there's 67,000 people that have bought points to increase their chance of drawing either a bighorn sheep or a moose permit in the state of Wyoming. These systems are utilized across the United States for different varying states to try to give longtime applicants that apply for a number of years a better chance of drawing. We currently have 30 years that we've had a preference point system in place for these two species, and those 67,000 people have bought into a system. What we found ourselves is in the task forces, we clearly have a supply and demand situation where there is much more demand than there is supply. A system that was adequate and worked for the first 20 years is probably not adequate and working correctly now. And so you'll find on your desk a little handout, and this probably boils down why the task force ended up with where we did. And I just want to walk through this. So the recommendation that came out of the task force here was to move away from a preference point system. 75% of all these licenses are allocated to those people with the highest preference points. 25% are just randomly drawn. When we started really crunching and we looked at every alternative that every other state out there and some that people from the public presented and says, what's the best methodology going forward? And so these are the recommendations that came out. And so I'm just going to go through this. It says we cannot guarantee everyone will ever eventually get a permit. And this was especially true for non-residents. And some of those non-residents have been applying for 30 years. phasing this system out, the preference points, it takes decades to phase this system out. And so the task force said, well, that's just not, I think the numbers they gave, it would take almost 40 to 50 years to phase this system out because of those 67,000 people that have bought points. And those 67,000 people are competing for somewhere around 400 permits a year that we issue. That varies from year to year. So you see that demand and the supply are grossly outweighed. So we went and do that. People that have preference points and have purchase points have a significant source of revenue. Some, particularly non-residents, they're into thousands and thousands of dollars. Even residents are into hundreds of dollars applying and accumulated these points over the time. Where we ended up falling after evaluating at least 8 or 9 different systems utilized around the country, and even some that were presented by members of the public, we come down to the weighted bonus point that has the highest lifetime probability of drawing a permit. And every year, even if you're a first-time applicant, you still have a statistical chance of drawing, albeit very low, but you do have a chance. So one of the reasons we ended up on this thing was just trying to, the old adage of doing the best for the most. Those 67,000 people all have an opinion on what's the best for the most. And trying to balance the need of future generations to have an opportunity to hunt moose and sheep in Wyoming versus those old timers that are significantly vested, 25, 28, 30 years they've vested in this program. How do you balance that supply and demand? And it was, again, this is part of the reason that we spent so much time on this, is trying to find what's equitable. What's fair for the 12-year-old right now under our current system, unless he just got really lucky, and we're talking single digits, usually less than 1% to chance to draw a bighorn sheep permit in his lifetime. Under a point system, he's got to apply 52 to 53 years. So the 12-year-old, by the time he's absolutely guaranteed a permit in some of these units, is going to be in his 70s. That didn't seem very equitable. Contrast that with somebody that's got 28 years invested into it. You don't want to jerk the rug out from underneath them and give somebody that applies for the first time an equal footing. So the balance that we tried to strike was to come up with a weighted system that give those long-term applicants much more higher probability of drawing a permit. Doesn't ever guarantee you, like the old system, if you applied for 50 years, you're going to draw. It gives you a much higher probability that in your lifetime you are going to draw them. Now, these are once-in-a-lifetime permits now. You get one. But this gives you a probability. That was the first thing we do, and then we took and redistributed those. So 50% of those will be heavily weighted to those people that are vested. 50% of those permits just go to a random draw. Under that random draw, more of those first-time applicants versus the current 25% allocation are going to have a chance of drawing a permit. This is where we landed up. There's no system that's perfect. We have a system that we have people that you want to encourage people to continue to participate, provide those opportunities with no guarantee, and for those people that are heavily vested, to give them a much higher probability that once in their lifetime, and all the hard work and all the financial money that they put to this, that they have a reasonable expectation based on some statistical probability that they may draw a license. They're just not guaranteed. So, Mr. Chairman, basically that is what the bill does. You will see we phase this in. This doesn't become effective until, I believe, 2029. And the reason to do that is given those people that are heavily vested an opportunity. If you've applied for 26, 27, 28, 29, or 30 years, we picked that phase-in date because those people, if they decide to apply for a permit, there is units every year that if they do, they can draw those. And so those people that are heavily vested, we certainly wanted to give them an opportunity to derive the benefits from all of their investments and the time they've put into this. That's why you see that phase-in date, so those very highest point holders will have an opportunity to draw a license before this system kicks in. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I know this is tremendously complicated. There's no fair system, but the products of 18 months' work and a number of meetings, this is the best system that we recommend to the legislature is the most fair system that we could possibly come up with. So I'd stand for any questions.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Really appreciate the good senator from Bags, all the work that he and the senator from the northeast part of the state did on that task force. Much of that work has passed through the legislature and into the department through rules and regs. This one's going to have some impact, folks, and I just wanted to stand and explain a couple of the things I said in committee. And one was I wanted to make sure that it got up here for a good discussion. This is an important policy consideration for the legislature. We had a member of our committee absent that particular day, so I wanted to make sure it got up here. I'm not sure by the time it works through the process where I'm going to be on this one. I've got a lot of constituents back home who don't like this bill at all. And I understand where they are because honestly, folks, I think what this benefits, this new system, is going to benefit the younger hunters and it's going to benefit the older hunters. It's the guys in the middle that are going to get impacted. And it's going to be a lot like the selection process for the NCAA basketball tournament. You know, some guys are going to get in, and then there's some guys that aren't. And the ones who don't get in are going to be really, really disappointed. But all of that said, here's the deal. And this morning, it's kind of ironic. I was talking with my eldest son, who he'd kind of like to come back and go elk hunting. And so I helped him with a couple of areas that he might want to put in for. He's an out-of-stater now. He's an engineer, and we don't have a lot of engineering jobs in Wyoming. And so, but here's the deal. He's got about a 9% chance. That's it. 9% now for him to come home and hunt. That's the reality of what we face here. If we don't go to a new system, we're just gonna go further and further in the hole on being able to try to give our younger hunters a chance to get out there and hunt. We have a very limited resource, and we've got tens of thousands of people who would like to go hunting and harvest one of those animals. It's a tough spot, and it's going to get a lot tougher. And you know, in my mind, I weigh things like this: is this going to affect hunters enough that they'll quit supporting our game and fish? You know, we've got to keep that in mind as we go along. I don't want young hunters to put in for 20 and 30 years and not ever draw anything. We can't have that because we need our young hunters. We need our young people to be supporting our game and fish department. So anyway, bunch of random comments, but that's what's on the mind of your Travel, Recreation, Wildlife Committee. I commend the interim committee. They worked it this past year and did a great job, and it's a good bill in front of you. Thank you.
Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read the bill, I found nowhere where weighted bonus points is defined. Can someone define that for me? Thank you.
Any further discussion? Anyone have a definition for the good senator? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, actually, I was thinking of something else, but I'm sure somebody else can. I can probably look it up and find it. But I will say this: it is a complicated situation, and as the good chairman said of travel, I think what this bill does, after many meetings with the Wildlife Task Force, it takes care of our older hunters. They're you know, we're going to get a five-year implementation, so all those guys that are at the top are going to have some pretty good odds. But I was really excited to see that at least our younger hunters might have the option to possibly draw with this particular formula. And so I'm still filling through this is such a long, I'll actually maybe turn it over to Senator Hicks to tell you exactly, but the math part of it is really interesting to me, because the first time we heard this, I was like going, I don't understand it, how this is going to really help. But when you see the math and the way they do it by squaring those preference points, it makes a lot of sense. And like you said, as like the chairman said, sometimes I heard from a couple of our 30-ish and 40-ish hunters that I think this is probably maybe not going to help them, but I think it actually does, because if you keep putting in for preference points and they square the number by the number of years that you've put in, it really does give everybody a better opportunity. And obviously, not everybody's going to get that opportunity to hunt these fine animals, but it's, like I said, the work the Wildlife Task Force did was amazing. And like I said, Dr. Schaefer, I'm not supposed to use names, the good president of LCCC did a lot of the work on this and has quite a bit of information if you want to find out a little bit more about how it all came about. He, and along with the good senator from Baggs, could probably tell you more than I can about the history and why this I think will work for our hunters. Thank you.
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Really some good summaries, and a huge thank you to the big game hunter from Baggs. The Wildlife Task Force was unbelievably educational. We found out that anything that has to do with wildlife is wildly controversial, and almost every issue is split down the middle, almost 50-50. So it doesn't matter if you're talking preference points, whatever you're talking. I think the committee, after massive testimony from hunters, out-of-staters, in-staters, everybody across the board came up with, by far, what is the most logical solution. Does it work for everybody perfectly? Absolutely not. But we did see that we had a system in place that was headed for a wreck. It was not going to be able to be sustainable long-term. This was the best case scenario we had, and I encourage you to support it. You're going to get emails that say you did the wrong thing. You're going to get ones that say you did the right thing. You just got to make the hard decision, and this is one that puts us on the right track, and it still leaves us somewhat intact with Game and Fish as far as what they do. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're very supportive of what the outcome has been. So I encourage you to be a yes vote on this.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I actually remember when we first did points, and I thought, well, this is going to be a wreck. Nobody will be happy. And I kind of wish I could go back to that first day. But I'm getting lots of emails, and I think the debate so far has been really pretty fair. And it does seem like the transition of the system will work to help younger people, which is something I've always really, really cared about, that, man, you're in the system and you can't even draw a license forever. And then kind of the people on the upper end, but the people in the middle, doesn't seem really fair to them. And I wonder if there's a way that we could kind of blend and share a little bit more. I know one idea, and this is from a constituent. He says, I do believe in the long run that this is the proper thing to do and will be a benefit to our young people, my boys included. However, and this is where the rub goes, having brought into the existing preference point system myself now for over 20 years and getting mathematically close to drawing a moose license, it feels a little like the rug is getting pulled out from beneath me. I would like to see if proposing an amendment would be possible. The current proposal calls for implementation of the bonus point conversion July 1, 2029, with the argument that it gives folks like myself over the next few years to draw a license. But we know that that's not enough time. That's not enough, there's just not enough chance. It gives you a chance, but it's not a very good chance. And that's to draw a license in the current system, but mathematically, it just doesn't work. I realize that we have to draw a line in the sand at some point, but I'd like to make sure that implementation date get kicked out a few years, and that might be a way. There also might be a way to have two systems in place for a little bit for different people. And it does seem to me that these people in the middle, men and women, but they're mostly Wyoming folks, and they've been doing what we asked them to do for 2 decades or more now. It does seem like we ought to find a way to give them a little bit more hope in this system at the same time we're doing the implementation. I can think of potential ways. Have 2 systems in place for a little bit, and you kind of vest in one system as you transfer out of the other system. Do something special for these guys in the middle, if they've been in there that long. I appreciate what we're trying to do, because the truth is nothing really works very well when you look at the future of a system like this. So maybe we could talk about that more. You guys all know more than me, but could we explore that?
Senator Landon?
So, Mr. Chairman, the senator's exactly right. This group that we've kind of alluded to today, they've been the ones who have helped us to move that department off the general fund and over. It sustains itself now, remember that. All the fishing licenses and hunting licenses that we buy, that's how we support the management of our game and fish. And so when they reach out like this, which was just described, I think there is room. And I think that we ought to maybe look at potential amendments. If folks have them, I would encourage you to bring them. And by the way, I didn't mean to confuse when I talked about the elk hunting and my out-of-state son. But I just wanted to set the stage for what we're dealing with here. We have such a limited resource that we have narrowed it down to 10% of the licenses, period, go to the out-of-state folks, which is appropriate. We passed that law a couple years ago. But, you know, tens of thousands of applications every year. Lots and lots of folks want to hunt in Wyoming, and even our in-state residents are struggling to draw. And I'm afraid, Senators, that's just the way it's going to be from this point forward. I was lucky to grow up at a time when you could pretty much draw anything you wanted. And we got to go hunting wherever and whenever. And those days are long gone. And so the work of the task force has been outstanding. And this was one of the big lifts that they undertook. And boy, did it take a lot of work. I do think this system will work. I think there's maybe a little bit of room in there for us to consider some of those hunters who have been supporting our game and fish for the last 2 decades, sitting there with lots of points. So appreciated the comments from the Senator from Fremont. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
For my second time, Mr. Chairman, to address some of the comments out here from my colleague from Laramie County, if you go to the front page of the bill, and you go actually into the bill title, it talks about establishing a weighted bonus points program. That terminology is referred to twice in the title there. When you get into the text, it talks about the bonus points and the mechanics of how you do that weighted. But that language is there in the title, and so the mechanics is in the bill. That's what common nomenclature is. It's a weighted bonus point system. The bill deals with the mechanics of establishing that. So on the phase-in thing with my colleague from Fremont County, we've heard this, and so one of the things that I want to relay to the members of the body here, so almost every one of these alternatives that we examine, Laramie County Community College here took their mathematical department, and they actually run statistical analysis on these, because you hear all of these, and you're going to hear these, there's this system, there's that system, there's this amendment, but if we do it that way. What that task force did, and one of the reasons it took so long to do this, is because as these proposals come up, that college and their staff would take those and they would actually run them through a statistical analysis. And so we were dealing not based on perspectives or perceptions, but actual reality based on data. And the reason to do that was to make the most informed decision, specifically to my colleague in Fremont County. So one of the issues that comes up, and the reason that the phase-in date does work, is if you as an individual, And so we have people right now say that have 29 sheet points, or 27, or 22. Let's just say you only have 22. Say you only have 21. So you're 7 points behind. And so within the state of Wyoming, we have some 25 different bighorn sheep hunting units within the state. You ask yourself, if it only takes 21 points to draw, why do there's all these people accumulating points? And the answer is they want to hunt one specific unit. They want the very best of the best, or they want the unit right behind their backyard, that's what everybody would love that. The point being is if you look at those number of people in those highest brackets, they're going to have to make a choice. Do they want to go hunt sheep, or do they want to hold out till they get the one unit that they really want more than anything else in the world, or do you get a hunt sheep? And so that number and that phase-in date accomplished that. Last year in the state of Wyoming, it was 5 sheep, what we call our core native herds. It only took 20 points for a resident to draw. And some of those maybe 50% at 20 points, but if you had 21, you were guaranteed. That's where the bulk of those sheep permits at. But they're not always the most desirable. Some people like to hunt, say, the Ferris Mountains, and they will not apply for anybody there. It took 27. That's a personal choice. That's your decision. You could have hunted bighorn sheep. And that's why we picked that phase-in date and said, look, we can't put a phase-in date for the very small minority that want to hunt the best of the best and push that out so they're guaranteed because they're 2 or 3 points behind. It took 27 points last year, or 28 to draw those very top 2-tier units, Laramie Peak or the Ferris Seminoles. And so if that's your goal, we can't push this out for it'd take a decade. At the same time, you're losing all of those young people for that opportunity to come into the system. So that phase-in date was predicated on the assumption that you can hunt sheep, but you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to hunt sheep? Same thing with moose. There was units last year, it only took 14 to 20 points to draw, but we have people that will not apply for those units. That's a personal choice. What we tried to do is not look so much at personal choice, but to define what was the most fair and equitable distribution that we could come up based on all the mathematical and statistical probabilities. And so I hope that helps answer some of the questions out there. Again, I would encourage moving this on. It's back to the old adage, is doing the best for the most. There's certainly going to be a few winners and losers, but I don't know what else we could have done. Just give you a background on how we landed on this decision. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you ready for the question? Question being called for. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to the report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 2, please say aye. Those opposed, say no. Senate File 2 has passed the committee of the whole. Madam Majority Floor Leader. Mike. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, I move that the committee of the whole beg leave to rise and sit again. But a couple announcements from me right now to make sure you hear. We will have a full Senate caucus at 2:15 in room W110. We'll be going over property tax issues and the goldenrod. A full Senate caucus at 2:15 W110. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I beg leave to rise and sit again.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion has passed. President Whiteman, I relinquish the chair. Thank you. Good job. Thank you. Senator Barlow.
Announcements, Mr. President?
Oh, yeah, announcements. Wait. Oh, that's right.
Just try to cut me off all the time.
There we go.
Mr. President, thank you.
Yes.
I move that we stand recessed until 3 PM, 3 PM.
3 PM. Okay, now are there any announcements? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet at 12:45 today to hear two bills in room 110, which is also the room we will be having our caucus in. Senate File 74, Immunity for Drug Overdose Reporting. Senate File 89, Certificate of Need Repeal. Again, in 30 minutes at 11:45, we will meet in room 110. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife, Cultural Resources Committee 6 will meet at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in the Wind River Room, W4, downstairs, to take up Senate File 88, the 2025 Large Project Funding Bill, and also Senate File 91, Petroglyph, Pictograph, and Historic Inscription Protection. How about that? Did pretty well on that one, didn't I?
Good
That's tomorrow
enunciation,
morning at
sir.
8, Mr.
Yes.
President.
All right. Let's do Chairman McEwen and then Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet today at 12:30. We will discuss Bill Senate File 60, Sales Tax Distribution, and Senate File 96, Wyoming Gold Act. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee, will meet tomorrow, Thursday, January 23rd at 8 a.m. in the Capitol Extension Room W002 and online to consider the following bill. Senate File 30, Wyoming Investment in Veterans' Mental Health. Senate File 102, Surviving Parents of Gold Star Veterans Exemptions. And Senate File 28, Special License Plates for Multi-Purpose Vehicles.
Thank you. Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, your Ag Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to consider two bills. Senate File number 64, Wyoming opposes mandatory electric ID devices of livestock. And Senate File number 84, Country of Origin Label U.S. Beef.
Okay. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr.
Vice
Thank you, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee will meet now to finish up the supplemental markup. So for those members, get your lunch and bring it up. And that will be in room 301. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, your favorite committee, Senate Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, number 9, will meet at noon recess here right after you finish your lunch in Capitol Extension W4 and online. We'll hear Senate File 20, Oil and Gas Bonding Options and Bonding Pools, Senate File 65, Data Privacy, Government Settings, Entities, and Senate File 95, Special Purpose Depository Institution Amendments. We will not hear today Senate File 66, Digital Ledger Filing System Development. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members. You heard the motion. Let's get to work. All those in favor of the motion to recess until 2 p.m., say aye. 3 p.m. Whoa, 3 p.m. Motion is 3 p.m. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed. Senate will stand at recess till 3 p.m.